Hello and welcome to another edition of TechLaunch in the News. Let's get into it. Hello and welcome to this edition of DevOps in the News. Let's dive in. Okay, in this first article, this is a pretty interesting article that's just going over trends for June 2022. And this is an interview with a lot of DevOps kind of specialists and kind of key contributors. And one of the things that they're talking about here is that serverless databases and serverless as a baseline expectation are becoming table stakes for cloud services being used by developers. In other words, it's a minimum requirement. And we see an increase in the offerings by public cloud providers and the adoption of serverless and distributed SQL databases for cloud native applications. And without elaborating on this in a ton of detail, this is a really big change that you're going to see kind of continue. There's a lot of performance benefit, obviously, to having this kind of serverless model and a lot of scalability, redundancy, and just kind of atomizing this kind of infrastructure and making it so that you can really get extreme performance, right? So definitely an interesting development that's becoming kind of table stakes. Another interesting thing that you'll see a lot of is that supply chain attacks, software supply chain attacks, have increased dramatically over the past year, and new innovations have been introduced to help combat that. And they, in this article, are expecting to see more companies improving how they manage their software supply chain as attacks continue to increase in complexity, and I would say dramatically in frequency, and their success overall that they have these attacks. There are some really interesting things in this article. This is kind of a visual summary, and you can see kind of what they're essentially showing as a graph of the software development, DevOps, and cloud 2022. And you can see they're essentially showing that there's an early majority, a late majority, early adopters, and innovators for some of these different kind of frameworks. And this is a really nice checklist if you're not kind of looking at some of these early adopter and innovator areas to at least kind of get yourself looking at them and possibly, working on some of them, looking at how you might incorporate them into your process within your organization. For the early majority and late majority, you definitely are going to want to, where applicable, go ahead and adopt these things and make sure that you're leveraging them fully. Make sure that you're digging in and really taking full advantage. One of the things that they note here is as well that low code and no code citizen developers are empowered to build applications and help unclog always under pressure IT departments. So the no code and low code is a really kind of consistent theme of constant development within DevOps and a big opportunity. They say these solutions can be used to help push along improvements in internal tooling and automation, and they expect to see a lot more development there too. Another interesting thing about this particular article is you can see that the 2021 graph shows a lot less kind of items on this graph, and it also shows a lot more things, a lot more topics kind of pushed further along in this curve. So that's also pretty interesting overall. We talked about serverless as a baseline expectation. One of the things that's really important about this is this kind of design change for flexibility and making it very dynamic, event-driven, microservice oriented. And this goes along the same line of thought with this atomization, being able to kind of enable this kind of meritocracy of the data, freeing the data from the actual infrastructure. And a lot of times that's a challenge if you think about it, because you're dealing with this kind of monolithic design structure that's been very pervasive in the past. And now going forward with cloud and with being able to leverage serverless as a baseline, you really have to think about your architecture on the software side a lot differently to be able to support that. One of the other things that this talks about with this whole serverless concept is it will help provide an abstraction that individual data products can work with and include capabilities for observability, catalog and lineage, federated identity management, scalability, unified access control, analytical engines, data storage, and others. That's a lot of detail, and we'll certainly unpack that in more videos. But the main kind of takeaway is serverless is a very consistent theme. Developer experience as a decision driver. This was pretty interesting. So this is talking a little bit more about what the developer's actual experience is like, kind of driving that big expense and big decision around the infrastructure side of things and just the overall DevOps experience. In other words, if it's a great car, then you're going to see lots of that car in that person's family. If it's a machine experience, like a lot of Mac advocates, you'll see a lot of people who advocate Mac within their entire family. Same kind of thing at work with some of these developer experiences driving these DevOps purchases. If they have kind of a natural influence and a predisposition toward a different stack, they're going to tend toward bringing that stack into the enterprise, even if it's a very kind of, relatively speaking, small platform. So that's definitely interesting that you can kind of get that. The other big thing that's pretty interesting about this article is this concept of data observability. The definition, according to this, is it is an organization's ability to fully understand the health of the data in their systems. Now, that's kind of a unique thought, this kind of health of the data. And it goes on to say that introducing data observability eliminates data downtime by applying best practices learned from DevOps to data pipeline observability. So it's using automated monitoring, alerting, and triaging to identify and evaluate data quality and discoverability issues. So the idea is that you're going further up the pipeline from a DevOps perspective and monitoring the quality of the data itself, which a lot of enterprises are seeing consistently, that you've got an accumulation of bad data, even though the systems are technically working. They're not effective with the data itself. And then democratized AI for developers. We're seeing continual adoption of AI and availability of pre-trained models, very importantly, in the cloud that developers can use to address common use cases without a machine learning experience. So they don't necessarily have to learn the guts and the details of machine learning to be able to leverage some basic pre-trained AI models, APIs that they can turn on, that kind of a thing. There's a lot more detail in this article. Certainly encourage you to take a look at it if you're interested. It's a really interesting study. Let's take a look at the next article now. This next article is talking about 15 tech experts who share their Agile principles that every DevOps team should follow. The summary here is highlighted in yellow, and I'm just going to quickly go over these. And this is kind of helpful as a DevOps focus to kind of refresh some of these different topics. The first one is frequent value delivery. The second one is retrospectives. The third one is frequent shipment of code. And this kind of gets into CI/CD, customer-centric action, short feedback loops, in other words, continuous feedback, motivated teams and simplicity, continuous testing, responsiveness to customers, breaking down complexity, leveraging test-driven development, so no submissions without automated testing, achieving functionality ASAP, flexible technology stacks, so not necessarily having a lot of interdependency or spaghetti code, but having it normalized, daily stand-up meetings, autonomy, and basically leveraging the full Agile methodology, not just parts of it. Now, you can go into more detail in this article. The idea here is that we want to just kind of refresh your thoughts and kind of get you exposed to some of these thoughts. If any of these hit a trigger where you thought, we don't really do this right now, or I don't really agree with this, I would encourage you to take a look and see where you can kind of dig in and look at these as opportunities. Most organizations don't do all of these things perfectly, of course, or even very well for a lot of the areas. Why is that in your organization? What can you do to take it to the next level? Hopefully this is sort of a checklist of items that you would prioritize potentially focusing on within your organization. This next article talks about 3 steps that DevOps should take to prevent API attacks. Now, this is something that has continued to come up over the last several years, and this particular TechStrong Con, the security products, the way that respondents kind of answered about the security products for their business, 64% said security and 36% said development as to who selects the security products. And this is pretty interesting because the idea is that APIs themselves don't necessarily have a driving force. It's going to be like the development team doesn't necessarily start by looking at security with APIs. And this is kind of a trend that's moving in a positive direction. A lot of development teams are becoming more and more aware of security, but typically it's kind of after the fact security teams coming in and analyzing the security of API endpoints. Now, this is also going on to say that they queried the conference goers about whether they had an inventory of all the APIs used within their software. And 55% said no, and 16% weren't sure. So again, kind of the idea is just having a posture of awareness about what endpoints are out there that might provide excess data exposure, lack of resource, and rate limiting, security misconfig, improper asset management, or insufficient logging and monitoring. And these are pretty challenging things to just magically get right. You're generally, in order to do them, you're going to need to have a reduced footprint and then prioritize which of these activities make sense to do first, and then continuously work on this overall. Another thing that they talk about is API runtime security and how it can essentially help to detect all of the OWASP API top 10 risks. And then finally, API testing. Dynamic application security testing rather than static application security testing being most critical. So in other words, actually hitting the endpoints and testing it with representative data and being able to kind of even take, as they're suggesting here, recorded traffic and exercise it against those API endpoints and see if you can manipulate that recorded traffic as well. So this is pretty interesting. This whole idea is that a lot more needs to go toward the side of the spectrum where the development is kind of hammering on this, architecting and planning it. And it really needs to be test-driven in nature and leverage best practices to prevent OWASP 10 API potential risk areas as well. Okay, let's take a look at the next article here. And just to wrap us up here, this is an interesting kind of piece of data that I saw in this article. Basically, the summary is that currently the DevOps market size is about 7 billion as of 2021, and it's expected to reach 37 billion by 2030. And so you can see that's about a 20% compounded annual growth rate over the next 8 years. That is a massive growth rate in a already quite large market space. And essentially the kind of very high level is the ever-changing, fast-paced workplace, timely delivery, and faster processing times and application development have become vital to a company's growth. I would say that's very true. The ability to produce vast amounts of output with minimal post-production flaws led to the birth of DevOps. CI/CD, automated testing, etc. DevOps as a technique or work culture, and that's a great way to say it, is implemented by combining interaction, integration, continuous deployment, automation, testing, and monitoring. Furthermore, DevOps beats the conventional model in the context of quickly detecting and fixing issues. So basically what they're saying is DevOps is really important and it's going to grow a lot. And we couldn't agree more. Thanks for watching this edition of TechLaunch in the News. If you haven't already, feel free to subscribe so you can see more in the news resources. We also have complimentary masterclasses and other resources available to you on our website, www.gotechlaunch.com. If you have any questions or comments, we'd love to hear them in the comments section. And until next time, thanks for watching and bye for now.